Thanks everyone for being here tonight for our conversation on surrealism and pop art with Dr. Sandra Zalman of the University of Houston. And I'm going to be introducing Sandra in a moment, but I wanted to share with you all that we're hosting this conversation ahead of our upcoming benefit on Thursday, April 27th, an exquisite evening, which takes its name from the Surrealist parlor game, The Exquisite Corpse. And I'd like to thank our co-chairs, Jaron and Walter Meyer. Thank you very much who are here. I think you all have met them. And also the members of our host committee who are here. We've got Megan, we've got Mary Catherine and Bailey, we've got Eleanor. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And now I'm going to introduce Sandra. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Sandra Zalman is Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Houston. She is the author of the book Consuming Surrealism in American Art, Dissident Modernism, which received a SECAC Award for Excellence in Research and Publication. Her work has been supported by grants from the American Council of Learned Societies, the American Association for University of Women, and the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. And she recently accepted the University of Houston's 2016 Award for Excellence. Her writing has appeared in Grey Room, Art Journal, Women's Art Journal, and the Journal for Surrealism in America. So please join me in welcoming Sandra, and thanks for being here.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me. I have a lot of images. I'm going to try to go through them quickly. Feel free to interrupt at any time. I lecture to college students, so I am flexible and I'm fine with that. I'm happy to have more of a conversation than a lecture. But I was going to give you kind of an overview of Surrealism's introduction to the US, which happened on a large scale in 1936, beginning with the Museum of Modern Art's exhibition called Fantastic Art, Dada, and Surrealism, which was curated by Alfred Barr, who was the founding director of MoMA. And right from the start, this exhibition was huge. It had 700 objects in it, which is enormous. And right from the start, Alfred Barr, the curator, wanted to present Surrealism as this idea that was prevalent in popular culture. So he had images from Walt Disney. He had advertisements. This was all in the show alongside the art. So there were moments on the right where you see De Chirico paintings hung in sort of a traditional white-walled cube idea. But then there was a lot of comparative material. I was asked to show Exquisite Corpses, which is a surrealist game that the surrealists were interested in experimenting with the subconscious. So the way the game works is that one person would draw the head, fold the paper, pass it to their neighbor. Somebody else would draw a torso, fold the paper, pass it on. This one you can actually see the fold marks. And so it was a way, you were supposed to kind of draw with the freedom of, drawing from your subconscious, not knowing where necessarily you were supposed to begin or end, or having an idea of the final product in mind. So these were in the exhibition. There were also, Barr really wanted to trace these art historical antecedents for Surrealism. So he included paintings that were 500 years old from the school of Bosch. But he also included folk art objects. This is a Sears Roebuck catalog folded up. And it's from 1936. So that's the same year as the exhibition. So this is very contemporary stuff. Somebody made the Sears Roebuck catalog, and Barr, the curator at MoMA, is yes, I want to put that in the show. And this caused a lot of confusion with art critics who thought that this show was a psychopathic ward. People joke that if you've lost anything around the house, you should just trot on over to MoMA and you'll find it there, because there was just so much stuff in the show. And I think this is testament to the true experimentalism of the show. Barr met with a lot of criticism from critics, and also from the trustees at MoMA, who asked him to withdraw some of the more ridiculous objects, one of which was the fur-lined cup and saucer, which is officially called Object, but Andre Breton, the founder of Surrealism, called it luncheon in fur or breakfast in fur. And I love this object because it kind of it exhibits like one of these great surrealist principles, which is putting two discordant things together. So you have like China, and then you have this fur of a Chinese gazelle being merged. And it also merges a tactile pleasure, sort of the fur, with an oral pleasure, which would be sipping from the cup. And I think it's also supposed to be like a comment on oral sex as well. So it's one of those things that you're kind of attracted to and repulsed by at the same time. Like you're attracted to this thing, but also the idea of having like hair in your mouth is kind of repulsive, like if you were actually going to try to use it. So it's the domestic and the wild animal all merged into one. Merritt Oppenheim also did these designs for shoes or for bracelet. This bracelet actually predates the fur-covered teacup. These are ideas for the gala. So Barr had a lot of criticism from the trustees. He also was criticized by the Surrealists themselves, who didn't want this to be this huge show. They wanted it to be just a Surrealism show. And so at one point they were going to withdraw their support and not lend objects, but Barr held his ground. He did his big show. He compared it as revolutionary as the Armory show was in 1913. So he thought the Armory show introduced abstraction and formal ideas to American audiences, and his show was going to introduce surrealist ideas, the idea of the fantastic. So he saw it in contrast to his very famous Cubism and abstract art show. I don't know if have you guys seen this chart before? Okay. Oh, cool. It's something that's often held up as this idea of like all of modern art. Barr did a lot of charts because he was a teacher and he was always trying to simplify things. But this show has become really famous art historically, and the Fantastic Art Dada and Surrealism show is less well known. But the Fantastic Art Dada Surrealism show was way more popular. 50,000 people saw it when it was at MoMA, and then it circulated for all of 1937 and part of 1938. So for a year and a half after it was at MoMA, it then went to museums around the country, to many more institutions actually than this show went. This is the catalog. So Barr introduces like 700 objects to American audiences with just like a 2-page preface. So people were confused. And along the way, a lot of Surrealism's ideologies literally didn't translate to American audiences. So the Surrealists were ardent Marxists, but when Surrealism came to the US, the Marxes that were associated with it were more like Groucho and Harpo, not Karl Marx. So this is Dali, who really loved Harpo Marx. And I think that's because Harpo Marx was like the silent Marx brother, and Dali didn't speak English. So this is Salvador Dali doing a drawing of Harpo. And Dali collaborated with other Hollywood people along the way. So now the advertising. As soon as Surrealism comes to the US, advertisers kind of see how seductive it is. And I think seductive is the right word because Surrealism is also very much about desire and playing with desire. And Dali went along with this. This is an ad actually that he drew that appeared in Vogue magazine. So they did this fashion spread, and Dali, Chelachev, and De Chirico all did illustrations of women in evening gowns that were for sale with jewels that were also for sale. So this appeared in 1937, so right on the heels of Barr's exhibition. And Surrealism, Dali also participated in doing window displays. I love this ad because it's an ad for an ad. This is the department store Bonwit Teller, which is was on Fifth Avenue in New York. And I want to liken it to like a Bloomingdale's or a Nordstrom, like better than a Macy's, like kind of a high-end department store. Oh, excellent, yes. And so they commissioned Dali to do a window display for them. And this was all happening around Christmas. So it's like the shopping season of 1936. So they commissioned Dali to do a window display, and then they also have 7 professional window display men doing other windows. But they're basically saying, this is a total tie-in with the MoMA show because these windows go up just like a couple days before the MoMA show opens. And were immediately popular. This is actually not an ad, or sorry, this is not an image of the actual windows, but from the period. All the newspapers were then reporting on how these windows were like show-stopping windows, and to distract ladies from their shopping, just the Saturday before Christmas was a real feat. But they were apparently very popular. These are, so in this is one that was not designed by Dali. There were 7 that were not designed by Dali. They were all rather tame, and they were organized around color. So one of the things that Surrealism introduced to the United States was strange colors. They call it like Baghdad blue was a color that supposedly the Surrealists introduced to the US. Tarantula red, putting tarantula red and Baghdad blue together was like a thing, or like pale pink and dark green together. So each of these windows was themed around a color, and it's really upsetting to me, of course, that we only have black and white photos of them. And in the corner of each window was the catalog for the show. So this is this total tie-in between the museum and the department store. They're advertising Surreal's, the exhibition that's at MoMA, and you can go around the corner from 5th Avenue to 53rd Street, and you can go to the exhibition if you wanted to. But you can see, like, here, like, the model is kind of looking at this surrealist idea of, all these windows are also themed around New Year's Eve, so you're supposed to buy your dress for New Year's Eve. And so there's like this exploding champagne bottle, and it's going around this eye. And then there's a newspaper article about King Edward's abdication of the throne for like his true love. So it's all about desire and seduction and inebriated states. So that's the frontispiece of the catalog that you see right here. Then Dali's window. So Dali's window was called the gayest of all, and it featured the least amount of merchandise that was available in the store. Some reviewers said it just featured a bunch of junk, but what this is like a black dress that was available for purchase, and then all of these red scarlet hands were like reaching toward this woman, trying to like ply her with gifts, perhaps. There was a dinner jacket with like a bunch of wine glasses on it. And somewhere there's a lobster, but there's a lobster right there. And so reviewers immediately noticed that like this, well, first of all, it totally disrupted ideas of design at the time, which was like spare, like showcase the merchandise. This is Frederick Kiesler, his window, like this is a more classic window display. Dali's was just like throw everything in there. And it drew a lot on his artwork from the time. So these are paintings from 1936, and this is all happening in 1936. So again, like very contemporary, where women have roses for heads, which is also happening here. And of course, his very famous Lobster telephone, again, exhibiting a surrealist ideal of putting two disjunctive things together to see kind of what poetic conversation might emerge from that. And Baumwood Teller didn't stop there. They took out more ads to advertise their surrealist windows. And of course, they were trying to get you ready for New Year's Eve. So this ad on the left, which I apologize, it's from a photocopy in MoMA's archives, pretty much follow, like a lot of these dress illustrations are very similar to normal ads for Baumwood Teller, but then interspersed with that are these melted timepieces, or like this eye with a clock in it. And the timepieces are at 5 minutes before midnight and 5 minutes after midnight. So they're kind of talking about, of course, the stroke of midnight, playing on these paintings by Magritte and Dali. And actually, MoMA bought the Magritte at the time of the exhibition. These are more surrealist designs. These ones are Dali's collaborations with the designer Elsa Schiaparelli. I love the shoe hat also because it, again, puts together two things that don't, it takes like the shoes that you're supposed to wear on your feet, puts it on your head. So it's all about these like inverse relationships. And negligee promotion was also a big thing that Surrealists offered with, again, different colors. Like it was all about color with Surrealism and putting colors you wouldn't expect together to be together. Immediately after, this is now on the heels, this is like Valentine's Day now. So it starts at Christmas time, New Year's Eve, Valentine's Day. Elizabeth Arden comes out with a perfume, and they say like, this is what you really need for Valentine's Day. And this ad is the first that I've found that used surrealist ideas without quoting from a specific surrealist work of art. So now advertisers are recognizing that surrealism is a strategy in and of itself, rather than having to specifically cite something, like in the Bonwit Teller ad. Sorry. Here they're citing specific paintings, like the melted clock is a citation from Dali's Persistence of Memory. But here it's, actually the thing that they're citing is perhaps, like there's these two hands reaching together. They might be citing the window, which was already kind of a derivative, if you will, of surrealist ideas. And even more specifically, one of the other windows uses this motif of the two hands kind of reaching together to try to, again, talk about desire. So this is weird because the surrealists were big Marxists and were trying to overthrow bourgeois culture. On the other hand, they lent bourgeois culture one of its most powerful marketing tools. So that's just one of the great ironies of history. This is a company on the right called Gunther Furs that is drawing from paintings by Man Ray at the top and De Chirico on the bottom that were both exhibited. These paintings were shown in the MoMA's exhibition. This one I love because it's a furniture company called W&J Sloan that can design a room for you. And they say at the bottom of this, like, your taste might not run to surrealism, but if you wanted that, we would do it for you. So it's like, you don't have to be that out there, but like we can do anything. And they're using, like, again, motifs drawn from surrealist paintings without quoting. Some of it's quotation and some of it is not. There were also ads like this, drawing on Magritte's painting that was by this point in MoMA's collection. And all of this advertising that was circulating around the show caused a lot of confusion for critics. Like, is this an avant-garde art movement, or is this just a popular marketing device? So we have reviewers like Emily Genauer who said, the drawings by the lunatic asylum inmates are as good as all the other stuff too. And like, there was this confusion over like what was art and what wasn't. And surrealism was just kind of circulating everywhere in the 1930s. And a lot of people tried to make it like universal, like your doodles on a telephone pad, the reviewer for Life said, are you letting out your own subconscious? Or, you know, there was this also a recognition that surrealism was, the surrealists were better at talking about what was happening in current events than political commentators. So they were saying, like, as, you know, this is, and it's interesting that this is sort of happening again, but they're saying, like, with the rise of fascism, the surrealists seem to be rendering this world, this mad, mad world that we live in, better than, you know, a journalist or something like that. So there was confusion over what surrealism was. Salvador Dali exacerbated that confusion on purpose. He literally became the face of surrealism on the cover of Time. This is also from December 1936, right around Christmas time. And he really cultivated that publicity, as you probably know. The picture on the right is taken in his, like, what's the word? Like, it's like the antechamber for his bathroom. It's like a dressing room, I guess, in his house. That is just like wallpapered with all the publicity he had ever gotten. So I realized that he took personal pride in all of this stuff. It's just like, wallpapered, collaged, floor to ceiling of everything. So I was really pleased when I went there in Spain and saw the Time magazine cover. He had been circulating in New York since before the show, since 1934, doing illustrations for popular magazines. And then later in life, he would do ads for Alka-Seltzer. But in 1936, he was still best known as a painter for doing this painting, The Persistence of Memory, which really spoke to people because it was done in this very academic, realistic style, but of course what it depicts is this kind of dream state and this feeling that this very rational thing like a clock could be dissolving, or as he said, it's like camembert cheese. So he thought not quite dissolving, but like rotting in the sun. You can imagine what camembert cheese would be like in, you know, in this state. This painting had been illustrated everywhere. In the US, by the time of Barr's show in 1936, it had been shown in 9 American exhibitions. It was brought to the United States by Julian Levy, who became Dali's dealer. He bought the painting for $250. MoMA bought it from him for $350. It sounds like a really good deal, but if you multiply by inflation, it's probably like $30,000. It's still good. You should still invest in that. If you haven't seen it in person, this painting is very small. It's just the size of a piece of paper. It's like 9 by 12-ish. And it entered MoMA's collection 1934-ish, I want to say, and it was the first Dali painting to enter an American museum collection. So Dali was complicating this relationship between high art and mass culture on purpose, but MoMA also sold works right off the walls. This is the price list for Barr's show, and you can see there are like hundreds of works that MoMA is willing to sell you from the museum, and they just ask that you please leave the piece in till the closing of the show. And they were also invested in kind of these good design exhibitions where you couldn't buy stuff here, ironically enough, but these were useful objects for very affordable prices. Even by the standards of 1940, $10 is maybe like $100-ish. And so they were trying to instruct you, like, if you could recognize good design in a teapot, you could recognize good design in a Picasso. But so they saw like this as a continuum, basically. So it wasn't that MoMA wasn't involved in commercial elements, but they didn't confuse them to the extent that Dali did. So in 1939, Dali was invited back to Bonwit-Teller to do windows again, but this time everything ended in disaster. And he crashed through the Bonwit-Teller window after he saw that store employees had changed his design. So the design involved a bathtub. It was a fur-lined bathtub, so here's the return of fur in weird places. And do I have, yeah, there's the picture of the broken glass. This is the only picture that we have of it because there are no pictures that I found of the actual display. But it was a fur-lined bathtub and a woman in a green feather negligee, or mannequin in a green feather negligee, like looking into the bath. It was called Narcissus. And the store had changed her, instead of wearing the green feathers, to be wearing a suit. And Dali thought this was terrible. He tried to salvage his original idea. He's like wrestling with this bathtub, and it all comes crashing through the window. So critics especially, accused Dali of doing this as a publicity stunt, because just 2 days later, he had an exhibition open at his dealers at Julian Levy Gallery. And there were lines around the block to get in, and he sold almost every painting except for a painting that had a little picture of Hitler in it, because Dali also had some fascist tendencies. In the middle of the gallery, you can see there's this weird thing. This is a tie-in for Dali's next mass culture project, which was the New York World's Fair of 1939. So the World's Fair of 1939, the theme was the world of tomorrow. It was all about the future. And the symbols that they picked for the future, this tall thing is called the Trilon, and then there's this perisphere, and then there's this weird helicline thing that was a ramp that kind of united them. So it's just like massive, actually ancient architecture, but it's billed as the world of tomorrow. And Dali, this is the cover of his exhibition catalog for his show at Julian Levy Gallery, and he uses that helicline to like penetrate this sphere and this column, and this very phallic column then gets breasts, and he really subverts the symbols of the World's Fair. These symbols of the World's Fair circulated everywhere in 1939. I have never seen any of the popular illustrations of it being subverted in the way that Dali does. So Julian Levy also, who is Dali's dealer, had a role in cultivating Dali's mass cultural infiltration. Julian Levy and Dali were called like a publicity team. It was Julian Levy who bailed Dali out of jail following the Bonwit-Teller smashing through the window. And it was Julian Levy who proposes a surrealist pavilion at the World's Fair. And this is his proposal, which is accepted by the World's Fair committee because they see surrealism as having mass and class attractions. And they're like, that's the best thing. We want the Vogue and the Harper's Bazaar set to come to the World's Fair. So this is the pavilion that Dali ends up doing. It's called Dream of Venus. And it's made out of plaster and rubber. And it's supposed to be this kind of like crustaceous thing. And then there's naked women like swimming in a pool when you go in. There's like a naked woman or topless woman dreaming, and then this is like her dream is like other women swimming. And once it kind of becomes this, it's actually in direct competition with it's in the amusement section, first of all. So World's Fairs have fine art sections. That's not where Dali is. Dali is in the amusement section. So he's competing with things like the Crystal Lassies and the Ice Girls and all these other girly shows, and his is a girly show too. So it's, while the World's Fair organizers wanted this to be a classy attraction, it was a complete financial failure. Even Dali was frustrated with it. He was really embarrassed by it. He didn't feel like he could control his own creative enterprise. This is it from the front, and you can see there's these women sort of like calling out. I think actually this photograph is really telling because like the two males in this photograph are like up front and center, and the women are like much more skeptical, like what is this? But it was just like this bizarro thing that was again trading on some of these themes that Dali had set up, even from his Bonwit Teller window, where there had been someone dreaming, and there was also like there had been a water theme because there was this fur-lined bathtub in that as well. This is it at night. And so for a long time after 39, you don't hear Dali's name around. He's really thought of as kind of a hack, a sellout. But in 1949, the Museum of Modern Art celebrates its 20th anniversary, and they do this exhibition called Modern Art in Your Life. And they are really trying to show you how modern art, despite what everyone thinks perhaps, it has affected all of these objects in your daily life. Hence, like fork and knife, but with the artist's palette, right? So in the Surrealist section of this exhibition, like everything comes full circle. So through this corridor, through a corridor that's flanked by Dali's Persistence of Memory and a painting by Yves Tanguy, you go in and it's like this dramatically lit thing, and they have recreated, this may be they've recreated 6 department store windows in the Museum of Modern Art. So this is like the tie-in in reverse. Like Dali had been doing store windows around the corner at Bonwit Teller, and now MoMA has those similar store windows in MoMA, which are again tie-ins to the department stores. So there were like Lord & Taylor, this one is for Bonwit Teller, Lord & Taylor, and some other department stores. But MoMA still was a little hesitant of mixing art and popular culture. Like you had to enter this area through, after you passed through the paintings. And they didn't, even though Dali influenced all kinds of window display, the curators picked professional window display men to design these windows, which were recreations. But all the merchandise is real, and you can still go around the corner to the department store and buy it if you wanted. And it still played off of these Dalinian themes of, say, sleepwalking, I think, in this from the 1936 ad. And I think this is really testament then to Surrealism's persistence in a way, because this is an ad from, I think, 2006-ish, when MoMA reopened, maybe it's 2004, when MoMA reopened in Midtown Manhattan, its huge building that it is located in now, they use the same fur-lined teacup to advertise sort of all of modern art. And not only are they using a surrealist object, but they're also using a surrealist strategy, which is to that displacement. Like that surrealist object shouldn't be in a diner. It should probably just be in a museum or nowhere if the trustees had gotten their way in 1936. But I love that MoMA used the teacup to advertise all of modern art at this moment. And then I just wanted to show you guys some really contemporary ads. So the MoMA ad is contemporary. This is an ad that one of my students found to advertise Rolling Stone, where a guitar and lungs are being sort of conflated here in interesting ways. This is Christian Loubitan, a shoe designer, which this one really plays off of Dali's window designs, because you have the mannequin returns, the ideas of being underwater, the dreaming of Venus, and the bathtub, with this like oversized shoe that's like swimming as a kind of mermaid or fish or something. This is from the same ad campaign, where the shoe again is like really big and center, and then there's a rock, which I think comes from possibly Magritte's paintings. It's another example of like anytime you see this an ad that is not showcasing the thing itself, or is showcasing the thing itself in a strange environment, it's probably being influenced by Surrealism. If anyone read Tina Fey's autobiography, I don't know if you did. It's really funny. I highly recommend it. But the photograph is directly playing off of Marcel Duchamp's Eros et la Vie publicity image, where Duchamp is cross-dressing as a woman, and then he has a woman's hand. This is a woman's hands, not Duchamp's hands, because his hands were deemed too masculine for the image. So I read a little interview with Tina Fey. She's just like, I don't know why we did it. The art director thought it would be funny. But I was like, I know what the art director was thinking. He was definitely thinking about that image. But even these are things from West Elm's website that I was thinking about, like all this fur on unusual objects. I think this is probably directly inspired by Merritt Oppenheim. You know, just to have like a weird fur-covered stool is strange, but we don't think about it anymore because Surrealism has so infiltrated mass culture. These things are already, let's see, 70, 80 years old. But they still have this power to, I think, shock or disrupt. This is why advertisers liked them so much, because they recognize in these surrealist tendencies that Surrealism had the power to get our attention. This is the Peggy mid-century sofa, which has been discontinued because it was apparently terrible and ruined many people's lives. Yeah, the reviews are horrible. But I think this is definitely playing off of Peggy Guggenheim, who started a surrealist art gallery in 1942. And here are just some more examples of here are the direct quotations then of like a Magritte painting. Or of course, sorry, this one is from the 40s. It's an ad for Surrealism by the Surrealists. If you love love, you'll love Surrealism. But these things kind of go on and on. Dali, in some instances, the Surrealists participated, like Dali, and in some instances, advertisers just took up these Surrealist themes. And when that happened, Alfred Barr, even in the 30s, was just like, send me your stuff, because I'm excited to see instances where modern art and mass culture mix. And so a lot of the images I've shown you in this talk are from MoMA and from his desk specifically, because he kept all of these things. So that is my introduction to Surrealism for you. And thank you all for coming, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Are there any questions? Yeah?
When did the MoMA design shop open? I think we were talking about the objects that were available. I was wondering if there's a connection.
Really good question. I think it must have been after the 50s. Because they were doing a good design. They'd started a good design series in 1950 that was in conjunction with Edgar Kaufman, who was a department store guy. He also is the person who funded Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright, or that was his house, the Kaufman House. And those objects were then exhibited in Chicago at the Merchandise Mart, but they were, as far as I know, they were not available at MoMA. So I feel like the design store must have started later than that. But it's a great question. I want to know the answer to that. Yeah?
Do you think with the political climate that maybe this is inspiring sort of a re-interest in surrealism, or affecting artists in a surrealistic sort of?
I think that's Really spot on, yeah. Like even in the 30s, people recognize, like, I mean, many reviews mention the rise of fascism, the rise of Hitler, and how bizarro daily life, like the real world had become. And then Surrealism falls out of fashion after World War II because, and again, directly quoting reviews, it was like, after you see what's coming out of Buchenwald and the concentration camps, like what Dali is showing us doesn't scare us anymore. Like the real world is too disgusting. Last year in 2016, Merriam-Webster called surreal was the word of the year, according to them. So I do think politics has played a role in Surrealism's reception, absolutely.
They called last year the word.
Merriam-Webster designated surreal as the word of the year, yeah. Which has been met with different responses by surrealist scholars. Some people think like that's a dilution of what surrealism is, and other people like me think like it's very appropriate. In fact, the word surreal entered the English language in 1937, so directly following MoMA's exhibition. So I think it's all just coming full circle. Yeah.
So much to me personally, so much of the imagery and the color compositions are unusual and almost cringeworthy, and I'm curious how you came to land on this as your primary interest, either in graduate school and or beyond.
I was interested in, it was a case study for me. I was really interested in just modern art and mass culture and how these things inflected each other. And I was very interested in the problem of how you have this avant-garde art movement that has become so popular that it's then not considered very avant-garde anymore. And that tension between those things. Because it was like, what's the point of being an art movement if regular people don't know what you're doing? Surrealism seemed to have transcended the art world and become very popular, but then critically it wasn't treated as seriously. So it was through that problem, and I found Surrealism was like my perfect case study of like, how does modern art and mass culture, how do those things coexist? So uneasily is the answer. Other questions? If you think of anything else, you can always email me or come talk to me afterwards. Oh, yeah.
So besides designing the windows, were there other instances where you had artists who were manufacturing works that were meant for mass production or mass sale?
Well, Dali's collaborations with Elsa Schiaparelli were like in between that, because she was a pretty high-end fashion designer. I think Mary Oppenheim did stuff like that. She's the one who did the Furline teacup. Magritte was a commercial designer before he switched primarily to being an avant-garde painter. But there's lots of instances of this. Like Warhol was a commercial designer also before he decided to become an artist. So I think there's like a long sort of history of people having day jobs and also having art careers. Yeah.
So was Dali particularly financially successful?
Oh yes, yeah. Much more so than many other artists. There's this great instance in the 50s where he sells a painting, a really weird painting called The Discovery of America by Christopher Columbus for $250,000 at the same time that the Met buys Jackson Pollock's Autumn Rhythm for $30,000. So like $250,000 versus $30,000, and like I would say Jackson Pollock today, his reputation is over here and Dali's is, you know. Those paintings would be like completely inverse today. But yeah, Dali made quite a bit of money. He also did a lot of society portraits, so kind of like Warhol also, who would paint portraits for people and just charge them a lot of money.
And psychologically, what was happening in the world at this time, do you know?
Which point?
Well, when Surrealism came into being, I mean, was
In the 30s?
Yeah, analysis becoming more popular, the psychoanalysis.
Oh, psychologically, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, analysis was becoming very popular. I think it really got super popular in the 40s. And that's when, like in the 40s, almost every Hollywood movie has like a dream sequence or something. That's when Dali was asked to do the dream sequence for Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound. And yeah, like Pollock had an analyst, like It took a little bit longer to get to the US than I think how it was in France.
Yeah.
But first, Freud's ideas were translated into French in the 20s. That's when the Surrealists really become very interested in Freudian psychology. And then it's translated into English. Yeah.
So all of this, you were interested in the commercial and the art and the interactions. What about, these were all American examples for them?
Yes.
Like as fashion. What about in Europe? Was it the same, or was America just so commercial that
America
it was particularly ripe for this?
was more readily commercial, and because American audiences didn't have, like a lot of the Surrealist texts, like Surrealist manifestos and things like that, were not translated until much later. So it really, this movement was introduced just through images. And yeah, I think advertisers were just more ready to like take it all in like that. There were Surrealist ads in Europe also, but the Surrealists were there to police things better, especially Andre Breton. Whereas in the US, it was more the territory of Dali, who came every winter and was just kind of like this, he had become this celebrity figure. So yeah, I think America is more ripe for this kind of infiltration. Yeah.
You mentioned before, when you were talking about the exquisite corpse drawings, I think a little bit about the studio environment. Can you say a bit about the sort of behind the scenes, maybe parlor-esque activities that might have happened?
The what-esque?
I said parlor-esque.
Oh, parlor-esque. Well, I think there was a lot of wife swapping. That's not parlor-esque, but that's what I thought you were going to say. The Surrealists really wanted to model themselves on, they were thinking about Freud, and Freud at this moment was considered, like a social scientist, even though he's, of course, been completely discredited. And if you're going to take a psychology class today, like, they will not mention Freud to you. But at the time, the Surrealists really were about research, and they opened up a bureau of Surrealist research, and that's where they would do these activities like the exquisite corpse, which was a way of letting your subconscious go. Or they would do, what's the word, like automatic speaking, basically, where like if I said blue and you say the first thing that pops into your head, like they, and then yeah, free association. That is the word. Thank you. Free association. So like Breton, there's a great interview with Andre Breton where he has to describe a piece of pink velvet. And so he's just asked a series of questions about it, like, is it associated with day or night? And he says night. If it were to appear on the body of a naked woman, where would it be? It would be around her throat as she was like strangled in a pool. Like what painter does it correspond to? Manet. Like what element does it correspond to? Fire. Like so they would do these like rapid free association games also. And these were all, and of course like recording dreams and paying attention to that stuff. Like that was all new after Freud. So Freud was, he didn't invent the idea of the subconscious, but he put a name to it. And so the Surrealists were really interested in that. And they came to be interested in that because Andre Breton, who founded Surrealism, had been a medical student, or a medic in World War I. And so it really is from the field of medicine. And then he, of course, stopped doing that and became a poet. I always think what his parents might have thought about that. But it is through science that the Surrealists wanted to be more scientific and rigorous, not necessarily aesthetic. The art stuff came later. So it was all very experimental. Oh, sure.
So the picture of Dali's dressing room, that looks like your own picture.
It is my own picture. And it's like before cell phones had cameras, and it's like a really bad picture. Okay. I'm sorry.
So where did you go to research? Or
His house is in Cadaqués, Spain, which is a really tiny, tiny, tiny town near Port Ligat, which is another tiny town. And so I went to his house. He has a museum in his birthplace, which is Figueres, which is like the third most popular museum in Spain after the Prado and the Reina Sofia. It's the Dali Museum. So I went there. There's a Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, because there was a big, big collector of Dali who moved his collection from Ohio to St. Petersburg because the city of St. Petersburg gave him a great deal. I did a lot of research in the Museum of Modern Art archives. and the Magritte Museum in Brussels. And I'm sure and the Smithsonian Archives of American Art. Yeah, I think that about covers it. Maybe I've been to some other places, but I can't think of them right now. Yeah, so I went to a lot of these places and just like gathered tons of material. But MoMA was the best, I have to say, because Barr just kept everything. So, yeah.
So it seems like there's a easy to make connection between Warhol and Dali with regards to commercialism, but would you say that Warhol was he open about being inspired by Surrealism and Dali, or was it just that they both happened to pursue commercial avenues?
I think Dali paved the way for what Warhol does to be okay. They certainly met because Warhol did a screen test of Dali. And I think they circulated in similar crowds. Like some of the people in Warhol's factory, I think like Ultraviolet also were friends with Dali. So I don't know if Warhol would ever claim inspiration from another artist, but I do think that Dali was a model. Maybe not even a conscious model, but he was around, they knew each other. And Dali was a major, major celebrity, and Warhol was very interested in celebrity also, and in becoming a celebrity himself. But I think in persona, I think Warhol is actually a lot more like Magritte, kind of keeping his cards close to his vest, like always being sort of in character. So I might talk about that more at the Menil on May 12th. All right, thank you guys, you're a wonderful audience.